Today, we're going to be covering polyamory, but I think first we have a listener question that, Holly, I think that you were going to tackle.
Yes, so our listener question, we got this question from YouTube, says, "Hi there, I have a question. So my girlfriend and I are both 24, and she doesn't want sex as often as I do. This makes me feel unwanted. And recently, she even said that she doesn't need sex. What can I do to improve our sex life other than talk it out with her? Because it would be like I beg her for sex. Would be grateful for your advice." Okay. Thank you for that question. I hope the writer of that question is able to tune in or check out our YouTube video once we have that uploaded. So,
I think a lot of people can benefit from this because I think a lot of people suffer with this mismatch in desire. And I think we've both heard at least once someone say like they don't really need sex, right? Hard for that does feel like they need it.
Yeah. I think what I would first say to this person is that's a really tough situation to be in, to feel like your level of desire is not aligned with your partner's, and it makes sense that you would feel unwanted if you're not being pursued by your partner, or your partner's not initiating sex. I think that's a really common and understandable feeling to have. Also, it's really normal for couples to have a discrepancy in their desire, and for one person to desire sex more than the other partner. So it's a really common conundrum to be in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's hard because I know the person asking the question, what can I do besides talking about it? But really that's unfortunately the most important thing from my perspective.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Like, what can I do to improve our sex life other than talk about it? And so I think that maybe says something about discomfort around talking about sex. I wonder how much this couple is talking about their sex life. I would encourage you to, have courage and talk about it at a time when you're both in, a good mood, and you're doing well, so you can really hear each other out and be curious about one another. In our last live stream, we talked about, is your sex drive normal? And we talked about different desire types, and your partner might have a responsive desire type and just needs to understand what helps her, elicits some desire for her. What are those factors that, play a role? So thinking about different sensory factors. It could be time of day. It could be, as simple as don't eat a big meal beforehand. What are the ways that she likes sex to be initiated? It's really about learning about her. I don't know if you want to add to that, Victoria.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing that might be helpful in terms of getting the conversation going is maybe using like a podcast or us, right? Like sending one of our videos or a podcast like Sex with Emily or Pillow Talks and be like, hey, I heard this. Would you mind listening to it? And maybe we can have a chat about it. That might start getting the conversation going while also providing some education that helps you guys.
Yeah, great idea. If you're a reader, the book Sex Talks is really all about how to talk about sex with your partner. There's some really good tips and strategies in that book as well. I also want to point out, in your question, you mentioned your girlfriend recently said she doesn't even need sex. And that could be that she's a responsive desire type, and that is kind of a common thought, like, gee, I never feel like I'm in the mood for somebody with a responsive desire type. They kind of wonder about that. It's like, I don't need it at all. But once the ball gets rolling, if they start to feel that desire and that arousal kicks in, then they find themselves really enjoying it. I think that would be one of the questions I would ask her is, once sex starts and once you feel like do you feel the desire kick in, in response to some sort of stimulation? Do you feel desire if you're reading an erotic story or viewing pornography, or your partner starts to initiate? Does it then start to happen for you? If that's the case, then she likely has a responsive desire type. And that could be why. It also could be she might identify as asexual, and she might need to, look into sort of the definition of asexuality to see if that better fits for her. So it's hard because we only have a very small amount of information, and we can only give generalized information that could apply to anyone maybe facing this situation.
Absolutely. And I think too, in terms of hearing people say that they don't need sex, I think, have they ever had pleasurable sex, or has sex maybe been painful for them, right? If sex is painful for them, of course they're going to say that they don't need sex. Why would they need it? If it's painful, it's uncomfortable, that's miserable. So maybe exploring if sex has ever been pleasurable for them, or if there's discomfort, and not normalizing the discomfort or the pain. That's actually not normal. We talked about that a couple streams ago about different sex myths. And that might be something that could be helped by seeing a doctor or a sex therapist.
That's a really good point, right? Like, we don't desire sex that doesn't seem like sex worth having. So there might be something that maybe could change in your sex life to improve it that would elicit more desire from her.
But yeah, thank you for your question. Holly, did you have anything else to add about the question?
No, I think that's all I've got.
Okay. And yeah, again, we're open to questions. You can leave a comment in the chat or comment on YouTube or wherever you feel most comfortable.
Yeah, and if anyone's viewing right now, feel free to jump in the chat at any point during our conversation. We love to hear your thoughts and ideas, or if you just want to say hi, we're here.
Exactly. Okay, so today we are talking about polyamory. We're talking about open relationships, kind of differentiating between and adding some education around it. And we have some questions that might come from a client wanting to know more about polyamory.
I'm ready. I'm excited. This is a fun topic.
It's a topic that's becoming more and more common, for sure. Although people, I think, see it as a very, very recent thing, but there was also a wave of it in like the 60s and 70s.
I mean, what wasn't there a wave of in the 60s and 70s?
That was the time.
That was the time, yeah.
Okay. You want to start us off with our first question?
Sure. Well, I'm wondering if we should define polyamory or if is that one of the, what is polyamory? The first question. What is polyamory, and is it different from swinging? Okay.
So we should talk about what polyamory is, what swinging is, what open is. So we want to talk about first the overall structure, which is either monogamy, unethical monogamy, or ethical non-monogamy. So there are like 3 branches here.
Hang on. We've got monogamy.
Right. Monogamy.
Okay. Ethical monogamy. I'm sorry. Ethical. I'm already messing it up. Ethical non-monogamy, and then
unethical.
Not. Oh, that sounds like a dangerous category.
So, sure. So monogamy is a pretty common term, but it's the practice of engaging romantically and sexually with one partner and remaining within the boundaries of that. So unethical non-monogamy would be you're basically pretending to be in a monogamous relationship in that partnership, but you are acting romantically or sexually outside of those boundaries. So
Okay.
such as cheating. Does that make
Oh, I
sense?
was going to say that just sounds like infidelity to
That's,
me.
yeah,
Okay.
it's infidelity. Yep.
That's a really fancy word for.
That's our branch. Yeah. And then
Mhm.
there's ethical non-monogamy. So there can be other relationship structures that are not monogamy that can be ethical. So what makes it ethical is that there's communication around it, everyone's aware of it, everyone's agreed to it.
Okay.
And then what makes it unethical if that's not happening? Is that
Right.
concise?
If there's a breach of boundaries, if you're going outside of whatever agreement you have with your partner, in a way that is deceitful, then that would be unethical. Non-monogamy.
Right,
Okay.
right. And so the big thing here, one of the bigger branches here, is just open relationships from ethical. And that really is just around a sexual dynamic. So people, they open up their relationship, their partnership, because they want to engage sexually with someone else. They may want to engage with that person with their partner in like a threesome, or maybe not. But it's not typically romantic if it's just open.
Okay.
And then swinging is the practice of a couple engaging with others together, typically, like going to parties and playing with others.
Oh, I always thought swinging was like literally swapping partners.
Yeah, that can happen.
But
Yep.
yeah, that can happen. But it
Yeah,
also, there's other behaviors and sexual experiences that would fall into swinging category.
swinging is like doing it as a couple.
Oh, doing it together.
Like
Okay.
you could go to a party together, you could swap partners together, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Any other questions about that?
No, well, in polyamory. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, we're
Yes.
getting there. Right, I was like, yes, the original question.
Long-winded, right. And then polyamory is the practice of an open relationship that also involves a romantic aspect. Polyamory stands for many loves. So it's the idea of opening up your relationship, having other partnerships with the openness to form a romantic attachment or fall in love. That kind of
Gotcha. Okay. And like a lot in between, right? There's so many variations of open
Absolutely.
relationships. Some couples end up in a throuple where, so with polyamory, somebody might be wondering, and I might be jumping ahead to another question you have on here, but let's say there's like a throuple, like three people who all love each other. Is that considered polyamory?
Yes. Yep. That's considered, there's another word called polyfidelity, when you have more than a partnership, but you're all kind of having the boundaries similar to a monogamous relationship. So you could have a throuple, you could have a group, but if you're all choosing to remain within that group, that's still polyamory and just considered polyfidelity.
But there's a lot of polyamorous individuals who have other relationships, romantic relationships, but they keep those separate from their primary partner, and their primary partner will have relationships with other people, and they're not necessarily all having relationships with each other.
Right. And that's another good aspect I want to talk about too. For some polyamory folks, there is a hierarchy, and then for some polyamory folks, there is not. So what you had just mentioned was a hierarchy where someone has a primary partner. So that might look like something like there's a married couple who is deciding to open up their relationship, become polyamorous, have other partnerships, and even fall in love. However, they still consider their maybe spouse to be their number one priority. And if for some reason polyamory isn't going well or something else isn't going well, it always comes back to that's their primary, they come first. And then some people do not have a hierarchy where they consider all of their partners on equal playing ground. And there's actually some controversy within the poly community of whether or not a hierarchy is ethical.
Wow. Oh, I'd love to hear more about what this controversy is, because in the work that I've done with clients who I who are polyamorous, they always follow the hierarchy model of polyamory. And so what's the alternative? Is it anarchy? Is it polyamory? Is anarchy?
There is relationship anarchy too, which is like we don't want any sort of relationship bounds or constraints. We don't want any sort of constraints that we have to fit into, right? But yeah, it's very common to have a hierarchy, but also I learned that it is also recently common to not have a hierarchy, and everyone's on the same playing field. And some of the reasons, which we'll get into, for people being polyamorous, like one of the main ones is really wanting autonomy. In a hierarchy, you're more susceptible to having rules placed on you because you have that primary partnership. And so it's kind of contradictory to the idea of having that autonomy and challenging the constraints of monogamy. And also, there's some talk about, is it ethical to put one partnership above another partnership because you're maybe treating that other partnership unfairly?
Well, I was just wondering that too, right? So if you're the partner who's not the primary partner,
Right.
is that fair? Because maybe you're putting the same, well, I don't know, what's fair, right? Because I'm thinking about maybe some things that primary partners might share. They might share children, they might share bills and mortgages, and they might live together and share a household. So like there's maybe a higher level of responsibility or accountability in that relationship compared to a relationship outside. I'm just wondering what the benefits would be for people that prefer the hierarchy model. Like, what is their justification for why that model is the best way? I don't even know if I'm using the word model right. Like
Right. No,
like a business model.
that makes sense to me. And I don't even know if people really go into it thinking like hierarchy versus not having a hierarchy at first when they're new to the poly community. I feel like a lot of people do get into the poly community as a couple. And so that would make sense that it's like you have an established couple, so they feel like they need to be in a hierarchy. This person needs to come first because we need to protect our couple as we open the relationship.
Yeah.
But I've seen this impact clients. I've seen a client who really, really wants to be a primary partner with someone, but they already have a primary partner, and that's really, really painful for them. So I can see where this like hierarchy model could be painful for people and why it would call into question like its ethics of it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. It also seems like it would be really hard to keep things fair, completely fair, at least in the world we live in nowadays, unless you're living as a single person and you kind of enter polyamory from the get-go and you try to maintain balance. I could see it being really hard to try to have a balanced approach if you start out polyamory already as a couple and originally as a couple exploring.
Right. Are you saying you feel like it would be hard to have everything be equal and fair without a hierarchy? Like if you're just going in without a hierarchy, having it...
I think it would be easier.
I
think it would be easier to try to maintain balance and a sense of fairness if you're, starting out kind of single and approaching polyamory in that way versus if you start out in polyamory already as part of a couple. And I guess it would depend on what that partnership, the original partnership, looks like. Like I said, if you're sharing a lot of day-to-day life together, responsibilities, pets, maybe kids, then how do you create a sense of fairness in other relationships that are, you're just kind of going out on dates and having sleepovers, but you go back to your separate homes and you don't have those other obligations to one another that you would in probably what would be identified as the primary relationship.
Right. And I think people in the poly, like seasoned in the poly community, might say like fairness is kind of a fallacy. right? Like you're not going to be equally fair to everybody because that's just
Makes
not
sense.
probably possible.
Yeah.
And the idea is maybe to get different needs met. And so it's okay for different relationships to look different. That's actually one of the perks of it. It's for everything to look a little different. So I think we'll get into this too, but that's maybe one of the mistakes people make when they're opening up and trying poly, is feeling like everything has to be fair. So no one is jealous.
Oh, I like that, because I just think that would be setting yourself up for failure and struggle and frustration to expect fairness and balance in all of these relationships.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
Are we ready for the next question?
Yeah. Moving on.
If I became polyamorous, what are some biases or misconceptions I might have to face?
So when you hear that, I think there's a lot. So is there anything that come to your mind immediately? Any sort of biases about the poly community or poly people?
That I've heard? I don't know, actually. I mean,
it's good, right?
is that good? Yeah, that's probably
I think we're making progress, right?
I think so. I mean, I think that there's I think the term swingers has been around. And I know we're not talking about swingers, but like that term has been around, I think, a long time. And there's probably a lot more of like connotation or like assumptions that go with that term. Right. But when I think about polyamory, I think people might mistake it for polygamy.
Actually, that's a really good point that we didn't cover with the different relationship structures, or the difference between polyamory and polygamy. Polygamy is multiple marriages, and typically it's one gender, from what I understand, marrying a bunch of the other gender, such as maybe a male party marrying a bunch of female
Traditionally, I mean, all right, I'm gonna speak with what I know, but the internet, you can judge me, or feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But my understanding is polygamy is more of a traditional setup, and it's traditionally a man married to multiple women, and there's usually a religious piece to that. People, participate in, or it's also known as plural marriage, and that people engage in that type of plural marriage and polygamy because of their religious beliefs. I'm thinking about Sister Wives. If any of the Sister Wives are watching, I love that show. If anyone listening watch Sister Wives, I watch it every week. And I stand with Christine and Janelle.
Okay. I honestly...
Just in case we have any Sister Wives supporters out there. But they are polygamists that went public, I don't know, like more than 10 years ago now, maybe? It's been a long time. Their kids have like grown up on the show, but yeah, it's a husband and 5 wives.
So one of the misconceptions that I've heard is that the poly community is really, when you think of them, it's like young Gen Zers.
Yeah.
And
hipsters, maybe?
Yeah.
I feel like, okay, if I'm trying to picture a polyamorous, polyamorist? Is that a word? Probably not. I think a poly person.
Poly person, yeah.
That was hard. I guess I picture maybe kind of a hipster, like new age kind of look. Although literally no one that I know or have worked with that is poly fits that image. So I don't even know why I have that image.
Right. Really, the research that's been done shows no difference in age, no difference in, let's see here, religion, education, political affiliation, or race. The only differences that they've really found for the poly community is that they are more likely to be LGBT, and they are more likely to prioritize new experiences and want to challenge social norms. That's it.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. It's not just the Gen Zers.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
People of all ages, all races, all identified genders and orientation. Mm-hmm.
Another one that I've heard is that the poly community is for sex addicts.
Oh, I could see that being a misconception. Like,
Right.
this is my way of justifying my sex addiction behavior.
Sure. But if you wanted to do that, why not just be single and have a lot of casual sex? Why go into polyamory where you're forming multiple partnerships and relationships, which is work? That's a lot of work.
Right. Well, I would think that that would be where like the unethical non-monogamy probably is more of the category that somebody might fall into if they struggle with a form of sex addiction, that they're just probably not feeling shame around that, living parts of themselves in secrecy, and likely not going about life in multiple partners in a very ethical way with intention and boundaries. I don't think any addiction really falls into a category of intention and boundaries, and it's usually more of a reckless, impulsive, or compulsive behavior.
Right, exactly. And along with that, another misconception is that the poly community has a higher percentage of an STD or STI rate because they're all sex addicts, right? But research has found there's no difference in the percentage in the poly community versus a monogamous community.
Yeah.
And from everything that I've heard, I've read, the poly community is really, really, really supportive, and they talk a lot about talking about sex, talking about protection, testing, right? If anything, polyamory, which is like ethical non-monogamy, you're probably safer in that realm than unethical non-monogamy, right? Right, which may be more in like the heat of the moment. Maybe there's no protection. Maybe you haven't talked about protection. Maybe you haven't tested, that kind of thing.
Right. Like approaching multiple partners, multiple relationships with those boundaries and intentions and care, like putting all of that into play, is going to help protect everybody, I would think, from that risk.
Right, absolutely. And then another misconception would be a fear of commitment. That you're having all of these partners because you just too scared to commit. What's your initial thought about that?
I think that it's possible. I don't think that would be fair to assume that about everybody. I think, if anything, and at least in polyamory, I think if we're talking about other forms of non-monogamy, perhaps there'd be some of those misconceptions that might hit a little more true, potentially. But in polyamory, you're kind of committing to multiple people. You're expanding your level of commitment. You're right? So it kind of is counterintuitive.
Exactly. The last one here is a little bit more serious. One of the big misconceptions is that people in the poly community, if they have children, their children have poorer outcomes because of confusion around having multiple like parental roles and the dynamics that go along with that and whatnot. Research shows that that's not true. Children don't have poor outcomes in comparison. Could be argued that they have like more time or more attention or more resources, that kind of different things. If you're in the poly community, we'll talk about this, you really need to have strong communication skills to make a polyamorous relationship or relationships work. And so their parents may be really strong in their communication skills to help with that upbringing. But this is dangerous because a lot of people don't want to come out as poly because there's been evidence that it can be used against you in court for child custody cases.
Oh, wow.
You know, if you think most judges might be of an older population, they may not have full understanding of what polyamory really looks like and might have some judgmental views and a lack of education and might rule in favor of another parent by using this against them.
That's sad. And
So
really,
sad.
especially something that's not well understood and well talked about, that, you know, a judge, I mean, how many judges are well versed in polyamory and understand, you know, what those communities are like to make any decisions with that as the reason?
Right.
That sounds unethical.
100%. I agree. And I bet it's more common than I think it is, because around 20% of the population have had some form of an ethical non-monogamy relationship, whether it's open or swinging or polyamory, had it at some point. And then actively right now, about 4 to 5% of the population are in a non-monogamous relationship that is ethical.
4 to 5%. That is really low.
But it's a lot of people.
But okay, sure, yeah.
It is low, but I also wonder too, with fear of coming out, how accurate that is.
Right, yeah. How are they measuring that if people are keeping it on the DL, you know, and not really announcing it?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because I thought 4 to 5% was high.
Really?
I don't know why, but
4 to 5% of anything is low.
Yeah, I guess you think about how many people that actually is. I was listening to a TED Talk, and they said that that's half the population of Canada or something. I don't know. It's a lot.
Wow. That's 4 to 5% of our country, of the United States.
United States, yeah.
I mean, it's the numbers translate to being a lot of people, but it's still not a lot of.
It's a low percentage.
Right. It's still not a lot of the general population. I wonder where that percentage will be in 15 years. Yeah.
I feel like it's growing. Right.
I think it's going to grow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Education around it and everything. And people are coming out about it on social media and educating about it. Mm-hmm. Social media, there's pros and cons, but that's one of the pros.
Yeah. Okay. Ready for the next question? Okay.
Yes.
What are the reasons someone might choose to be polyamorous?
So there's a few different reasons why people might choose to engage in a polyamorous dynamic or relationship. So as we had talked about a little bit before, people really like the idea.
What?
I see your face right now. I'm sorry.
Well, if you saw, let me explain to anybody who is watching. For anyone who's watching, and I don't know if they do their own live streaming, I look like I'm in a spaceship right now. There's a million lights flickering and buttons going, and this person's following you popping up, and sometimes I'm like, wait, what's that? What's that? As I'm trying to listen to you.
Oh, serious. Oh, man.
I apologize.
Okay.
Victoria.
Don't apologize. I loved the look on your face. It was I don't know what I'm about to hear, and I don't know if I'm ready for it. It's just that point in the night.
It's that point in the night, and for anyone listening, Victoria and I run our own businesses, our own practices. We have been going at it all day. That we're not at our freshest here, But
right.
Hey, we just gotta show up as we are.
Exactly. So we had touched upon autonomy, that people sometimes feel constrained by monogamy because there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of boundaries, right? and they want to kind of embrace more of their independent self and explore, have new experiences, have new sexual experiences, learn more about themselves and about other people. And this is, a route that supports that.
Yeah, I have thought, I mean, they're not just my thoughts, but I think that monogamy in general is, a tall order, and it's becoming more difficult. Uh, you know, Back in the olden days, marriage, I mean, there's monogamy in marriage, right? And so there's a difference, right? Monogamy is one partner and committing to one partner, and obviously marriage is a legal arrangement. But, back in the olden days, marriage was, almost like a business arrangement. It was, you've got the cows, I've got the pigs. I think our kids should marry because, we can combine our resources or whatnot. And people didn't necessarily marry for love. They married for, the logistics and the status and all of that. It was an economic institution. And, with the Industrial Revolution and a lot changing, marriage became less about that and more about love and, passion. And people started living longer. Till death do us part was like 40, and now we're living to like almost 100. So I think monogamy has become more and more about more and more things. Now you're combining lifestyles and you're making financial decisions and you're raising families, and but you're also supposed to meet my every emotional need and, make me feel loved, but also excite me and give me romance, and also make sure you do the dishes because I've asked you 500 times. Like, it's become about so much, and it's a really tall order that so many people are feeling like destined to fail, that it's not enough. We're asking too much of one person. And so to even sustain a relationship in the long haul would, for some people, they think that seeking out other partners or other sexual experiences is what helps them sustain.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
right, having their needs met through other partners, because one person cannot fulfill all of those needs.
Yeah, there's this recognition of that, people not being able to fill needs, and then also just wanting to get rid of their own pressure to fill their partner's every need.
That too, right? And it can become like a win-win where now we both can branch out and have our needs met in other ways through other relationships, and that is ultimately what will sustain us. Some people do that for, I know we're talking about polyamory, and I'm talking about kind of what would encompass a wider variety of other non-monogamy lifestyles. But for some people, that's their primary reason why they would seek out other partners, is to actually stay together and feel like we have to do something different to sustain what we have, because putting all of the pressure on just the two of us is too much.
Right. Right, exactly. And I know that there is a difference between straight monogamy and marriage, right? Marriage isn't the only setup for monogamy. People can be in a two-person partnership without being married, but the divorce rates, like they're scaring people away from monogamy as well. It's kind of highlighting, well, if there's a greater chance of it not working out than working out, what are we doing here?
Why are we just going to sit here and wait for it to fizzle out or fade, or for us to realize we can't make it just the two of us? I mean, I'm not crapping on monogamy. Like, I think there's a lot of, ways of sustaining. I think that more and more in the work that we do, we're hearing more and more about how can couples sustain long-term relationships. This is one way that some people do that. is they open up their marriage to other experiences and possibilities and maybe other relationships, like in polyamory. That's one way, but there's a wide variety of other ways that couples can do that. I do think that's one reason why some people pursue polyamory.
Right. And we should make a clarification here, which is leading into our next question.
Okay.
Like that.
Oh. I'm like, what's the next question? Here it is. Are there any wrong reasons for choosing to be polyamorous? Did we cover all the reasons why somebody would be was there anything else that I didn't? We covered it.
The main reason, the only other reason really that I've heard is just feeling like you have more love to give. You have that capability to love more than one person at a time. And
that's another one. Yeah, I've heard that too. Like, yeah, like it's possible to love more than one person simultaneously. Okay. So then, are there any wrong reasons for choosing to be polyamorous?
Right. Yes. And so this is fine with what you were just saying, right? Sometimes people in a couple will choose to open up their relationship or be polyamorous to help support it, to help support that dynamic. But if you're doing it to save the relationship, like you're not willing to work on the relationship and it's to save it, that's when it's wrong. That's when it's really not going to be helpful.
Well, and if you're already on shaky ground, certainly opening up yourself to other relationships, I think, is just adding fuel to the fire. If you're not feeling secure in your relationship with your partner and then you start to engage in other relationships, I think that is naturally going to exacerbate those problems.
Absolutely. And not to say that if you're having any sort of difficulty, like if you have jealousy, that you can't open up your relationship. We'll talk about that. But if you're doing it to save it and you're not willing to work on it, you're not willing to seek maybe professional help to help you work on it, that's not really the answer. Another maybe wrong reason is if you're in a dynamic and your partner won't stop being unfaithful, and so you're just looking to maybe have more control over it. That's not going to work either, right? In polyamory, you have to have open communication. You have to be willing to have hard conversations. You have to be willing to have agreements and boundaries and opening up a relationship because it's struggling with infidelity isn't the route to go there.
Right. If you have this thought, well, my partner's going to cheat anyway, might as well just give him permission, a willing participant in the situation. Yeah, that's certainly not going to, again, that would be like you're starting off on very shaky ground. You're in a really insecure place in your relationship. You have to kind of be solid, I think. Of course, we're talking about couples entering polyamory, not necessarily a single person. Yeah.
And the only other one that I have really is that just because your partner really wants to, like you're adamantly against it, you really don't want to, but you're scared of either them leaving or hurting their feelings or whatever, that's not a reason either if you're not ready.
Yeah. All good reasons. And I think if you're struggling with that decision, that would be a good time to seek out like a poly-friendly therapist to maybe help with that decision-making process and help guide the two of you.
I agree.
I had a thought and it escaped me and it won't come back. But it was about this. Wrong reasons for choosing polyamory.
Go back.
If I think of it, I'll jump in. Okay, I experience jealousy. Does this mean I can't be polyamorous?
This is maybe a misconception that we missed, is that in the polyamory community, there's no jealousy. There's only compersion. And so what compersion is the actual joy for somebody else's happiness.
Compersion? Did the poly community make this word up? Is this a real thing?
This is a real thing. And
What?
the poly community didn't make it up. It was some Christian community. I don't remember exactly.
That's kind of funny.
But yeah. So yeah, it's the idea of feeling joy for your partner's joy. So you might be, people in the poly community have described seeing their partner make out with another person and then feeling joy.
Okay.
Right. And so, yes, compersion is a thing, and it can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Typically happens maybe being in the poly community longer.
Okay.
But lots of very public poly people describe experiencing a lot of jealousy, especially at the beginning of opening up a relationship or deciding to be polyamorous, and that's completely normal. It's also completely normal to experience it well into being polyamorous. It's just, I think as a society, we think if you experience jealousy, that's bad. You shouldn't. No one should ever make you feel jealous. Your partner shouldn't make you feel jealous. And if you're feeling jealous, that means something's bad and wrong, which is necessarily true. Jealousy can be a really good alarm, but sometimes it's a false alarm, right?
Okay.
And we need to have some self-reflection and understanding. Am I feeling jealous because I'm missing something here? There's an unmet need. Or am I feeling jealous because I want more control, or I want to feel worthy and I'm not feeling worthy right now, and that's inner work that I need to do? But it's really, really normal. You can have jealousy and still have a really successful polyamorous dynamic.
You know what this makes me think of is the audiobook we've been listening to, which I actually finished yesterday. Or maybe, no, today. I finished it today. Wow. This morning feels like many lifetimes ago. I finished it today. I wonder, how far did you get, Victoria?
I haven't picked that up in a couple weeks. I'm not going to lie.
It's a rough one.
The narrator is rough.
Okay, this book is called The Non-Monogamy. I want to make sure I get the title right, and it's by Tammy Nelson? Neeson?
I think it's
Nelson. Who we have taken a training with, and she's somebody who also specializes in sex therapy. But okay, my point being, and the narrator's terrible. I don't blame you for giving up. Sounds like a robot. But
I'll get back to it. I'll get back to it.
You know what? There were things about the book that I appreciated and I liked, and there were things that fell kind of flat for me. Just to give a little bit of context to anyone listening, the book is intended to help a couple in the aftermath of an affair and to help them recover, rebuild trust. And part of that recovery process is creating a new monogamy agreement, which might involve opening up the relationship to having possibly sexual experience with other partners, or she doesn't really talk about polyamory so much, but I would imagine that's also included. Anywho, what feels a little off to me about the book is that we go from the aftermath of this affair and kind of this couple in crisis and rebuilding trust to then okay, let's talk about our fantasies and how we might have these other sexual experiences, and it just feels like a really quick turnaround. And I don't know that the book intends for it to read that way, but I'm like, wow, this feels really dangerous. You were just kind of like we were just talking about. You're just in this really shaky ground. There was a big violation of trust and betrayal, and now we're so what do you think about swinging? It just feels like a lot.
Yeah.
But there were some things I really did like about it, and she talks about how when a partner who has been cheated on asks her, how do I trust my partner again? How do I rebuild this trust? She talks about how really the biggest work for that person is to work on how they're trusting themselves. How can they improve following their own intuition? And she will say that often partners will say, I had no idea this whole time. I was blindsided and I didn't even see it coming. And she'll kind of gently challenge them and say, well, when you look back, were there actually warning signs? Were there moments where you thought something was off and wrong, but you just couldn't, maybe put your finger on it, or maybe you just weren't in a place where you could acknowledge that it was too much, or maybe you were in denial. And anyway, she describes how you learn to trust yourself and your intuition versus what is a more reactionary, fear-based response, like just being triggered. So she says that the more impulsive, quick, louder, reactionary type of response to a situation is more of that fear or that feeling triggered, and that your intuition, that inner voice that's guiding you, is actually a calm and more quiet voice. And that's the voice to connect with and listen to, and that is the voice to guide you. And learning to listen to that voice is how you rebuild trust. So my point, what was my point, Victoria? We were
We're talking about jealousy?
Jealousy. And you were saying how, sometimes it's a false alarm, and sometimes it's indicative of, something, indicative of a real need that's not being met. And I think that concept of how to figure out what the difference is probably very similar to that process that Tammy Nelson describes in her book, which is if it's loud and impulsive and reactionary, that's not your intuition. That's usually defensiveness or an insecurity or something more kind of surface level. But that if you wait until you're in a more calm state and you just pay attention to that intuition, that's more of a calm, quiet voice, that will guide you. Is there something going on that is warranting that jealousy, or is it that this is a new and different experience? I would think that there's got to be a transition phase for couples starting out polyamory, that when the first time you're engaging with new partners is just scary and unsettling and new and different, and that you're going to have a lot of different feelings around that.
Right. And even if you don't subscribe to the idea of monogamy, there is still cultural programming, right? So we may feel like our worth is dependent on meeting our partner's every need. And the fact that they're out and they're with somebody else and they're getting their needs met from somebody else really can trigger this feeling of unworthiness in us because we're not doing that. And so that's where some of the inner work comes in, is you are worthy regardless of if you're meeting your partner's every single need. And it's normal not to be able to do that, right? It's just maybe some monogamous relationships, they get those needs met through maybe different friendships or different ways, right? But that's very normal.
Yeah. Okay. I went off on a tangent there for a minute.
It's okay. One last thing that we should talk about quickly is boundaries and agreements that polyamorous dynamics make.
Okay.
So we haven't really touched upon that. When you're opening up a relationship or you're engaging in poly, typically, there are different agreements that you make to help this to be successful and for everyone to kind of feel comfortable and feel like their boundaries are met. There is controversy in the poly community about agreements as well, because there's a thin line between an agreement and a rule. And the poly community doesn't really like the idea of a rule where it's you have to do this, period. But if there's an agreement, a conversation of this would make me comfortable, how do you feel about that? If there's negotiation, such as, maybe I'm not really feeling really comfortable giving out, our address. How do you feel about that? And you might say, I can understand where you're coming from. Maybe we wait to the third date to bring them here. How does that work for you? If it's a negotiation, that's more healthy. But if it's a rule, you're asserting control. And one of the ideas of poly is having more autonomy, right? This is your fighting against that.
Okay. It's interesting.
Right.
I mean, are we just getting caught up on language? There are some okay, again, internet, feel free to correct me, further educate me. I think that there are some situations that call for negotiation and call for boundaries and discussion, and there are some that call for rules.
I
And
know.
I think that if you're having sexual contact with other partners, I think that is a vulnerable enough position to put yourself and others in that might warrant, dare I say it, a rule. For safety reasons, for
Absolutely.
right, like, and so it's interesting. Is that an exception, or is that still part of the we are autonomous and not putting boundaries and we're
I
free?
know. Well, there's controversy around that.
Of course there is.
There is,
Of course
right?
there is.
Which is fair. There's controversy in monogamy. There's controversy everywhere. This is not to like knock the poly community. There's controversy everywhere.
No, I love you, poly community. If you're listening, please jump in the chat.
But the idea is that it's a rule that doesn't have to be made, from what I've heard, because the majority of the poly community is extremely on board with sexual safety. And so it's like, it's an agreement because like we're all agreeing to it. You know, it's just the negotiation might be, well, like how long do you have to wait for a test, because there are some like, well, certain STIs or STDs won't show up on a test for 3 months after. Like that might be where the negotiation is. But
well, like what is this common unspoken agreement among the poly community? What are they all doing? Are they all getting tested every month? Are they all wearing condoms? Are they all like, I find that questionable. That
right.
I think that, I mean, we don't even have a good handling on some basic sex education and knowledge around even how some STDs are transmitted. So, I mean, I'm not trying to sell them short, because perhaps they're that much more intentional and do a lot more self research and knowledge. But I think I'd have a hard time maybe kind of leaving it up to, well, everybody in this community is safe enough that we don't need to have any hard boundaries or rules.
I think there's discussions around it and agreements. They just don't feel like it's a rule because it's so accepted. But again, like I think you can find mixed opinions about that as well.
I think we should have an argument about it right now, Victoria. I just feel like arguing with you for some reason.
I agree with you that sexual safety is important.
I still feel like we should argue.
I'm just arguing with someone. But there's also like some compassion and understanding and acceptance that when you're first getting into poly, you're probably going to have more firm boundaries or rules because like you're getting your feet wet in it. It's something like you're learning as you go.
Yeah, that makes sense. I bet there could be a whole book written on that transitory phase of starting out.
Sure. But if you are interested in learning more, you can ask us questions, or you can find different podcasts. Like Making Polyamory Work is a great one, and Multiamory is a great one as well.
Multiamory. Is that a new word, or?
That's the only time I've ever heard it, and they reference polyamory every time too. So I'm wondering if they were just like switching it up, because poly, multi, they mean the same thing.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Victoria. This was enlightening. Yes, please leave us questions in the suggestion box. Leave a comment if you're listening on YouTube. We will be happy to do our best to answer any listener questions at the start of any of our live streams. So we will catch you guys in the next one.
Hi, everyone. Have a great night.
Have a good night. Bye.